صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we're going to have a little bit of maybe about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour session on some of the other rules about fasting. We had covered some of them last Thursday night, but there's a few areas that we didn't go into, so we'll try to tackle those this afternoon. And we'll also try to keep some room within the discussion if there's any questions that you have that we'll try to answer as well within this time frame that we have available tonight. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the advent of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So today being May the 31st, we have about 7 days until the month of Ramadan begins. There's obviously there's a very slight possibility for the 6th of June to be the first day. But more so, it looks like the 7th, which I believe is a Tuesday, should be the first day of the month of Ramadan. There is, again, a very small possibility of moon sighting in Hawaii and the Polynesian Islands. But obviously, it would based upon, if we have individuals from our community who are reliable and trustworthy and have seen the moon. But in either case, wanted to go over some of the rulings about the month of Ramadan that we did not speak about last week, and also some other areas we'll try to further elaborate on today. And then also, if time permits, to go over some questions that maybe some of us might have about the month of Ramadan. So first thing I want to look at is the issue of starting the fast. Because there's always this question comes forth that the last day of the month of Sha'aban, there's obviously a possibility for that to be the first day of the month of Ramadan. And so how do we deal with that? Is it the last day of Sha'aban? Maybe there might be a moon sighting that might come later on sometime in the daytime. And traditionally, based on hadith, where we're encouraged to fast the last 3 days of Sha'aban and to join that with Ramadan, and we're told that the reward obviously is immense for that. And so some people might fast those last 3 days of Sha'aban, and one of those might end up being the day of Ramadan, or a day of shak, or a day of doubt, as they refer to it as. So generally speaking, as the scholars say, when it comes to this issue, whether it's the last day of Sha'aban or the first day of the month of Ramadan, is that it's not obligatory, it's not wajib to fast on that day if you don't know if it's the month of Ramadan has begun or not. So you don't know, today is, for example, Monday, let's say the first of Ramadan or last day of Sha'aban, and we don't know for sure. It's not obligatory to fast on that day. And we're allowed to fast, though. So for example, as the scholars mention, if somebody does fast, that the important point is that don't make your intention to be the intention of the fast of Ramadan, right? Because you don't know if it's Ramadan or not. So what the scholars mention is that if you have a qadha fast, maybe that you have to make up, or you want to keep a mustahab fast, or maybe you had another or an oath or a promise you made to Allah before, you could fast on that last day of Sha'aban. And basically, if it is the first of Ramadan, your fast is automatically converted to the fast of Ramadan. Although Sayyid Sistani does mention it's still recommended to make the intention as the month of Ramadan fast, but it's not an obligation, but it is recommended. So again, if for example, Monday, because right now, the way we look at the calendar, Monday is a day of doubt. It may be the first month of Ramadan, and it might not be based on the moon sighting. So if a person wants to fast, you can keep the intention of qadha or another fast which you may have. And if sometime in the morning or the day you find out that it is actually the month of Ramadan, then obviously that would be automatically changed and reverted to a Ramadan fast, and that would begin the month of Ramadan. Any questions on that part, first of all, before we go forward on anything else? Yes? So basically what we're saying is that if let's say we take Monday to be the 30th of Sha'aban, if a person wanted to fast that day, not knowing will this be the last day of Sha'aban or the first day of month of Ramadan, we don't know yet. You wouldn't keep the intention that day, the niyat, let's say the night before or the morning when you wake up for Sahri, you wouldn't make the niyat that I'm fasting Ramadan today. So you just keep it as a general intention, or if you had a qadha fast, you'd make that intention. But let's say maybe sometime in the morning before, where we haven't gotten confirmation till early in the morning the next day of the month of Ramadan beginning. So then if we were to find out, let's say Monday you fasted, maybe you had Sahri, you prayed namaz, you went to sleep, you woke up for work, let's say you woke up at 7 in the morning, and you get an email, today is the first day of Ramadan. So because you already started fasting, you'd continue that, but now it's recommended to change that niyat from that Sha'aban fast or a qadha to a wajib fast. So it's recommended that, it's mustahab to change your niyat at that point, although you don't have to, because if a wajib fast is there, obviously you can't do a mustahab fast if a wajib is pending upon you. So that's what that means basically there. Yeah. One of the questions, I don't want to go into too much detail in the next one, but one of the questions that people ask is, how do we determine the new month? Right? We know that the Prophet mentions in the tradition that to begin fasting when you see the new moon, when you see the actual crescent moon that has formed, and to end the fast at the end of that month when the new moon is seen. But one of the challenges that we have is how to determine the moon. Right? Just because the calendar which an organization or a Jamaat puts forth says that Tuesday is the new month, it doesn't mean that calendar holds any weight. Right? So there has to be some legal basis or criteria in Islam to determine when the new moon is. Not only the new moon, but rather when it is visible. Right? And it's a big astronomical discussion of astronomy and the moon's birth and a lot of scientific aspects to go with it. I don't want to go into any of that today because it could literally take us hours, if not days, to discuss all the scientific data behind it. But the scholars give us 4 basic qualifications of how we determine the new moon. Right? One is that if you yourself go out on the night where the moon is, so for example, because there's a possibility to see the moon on Sunday, if you yourself go out and you've done all your research, you know where the moon should be, you know the altitude, you know all of the scientific background of the moon, where it should be, how bright it would be, the angle, all of those things, and you yourself see the moon, then for you, then it becomes wajib that obviously that next day is the beginning of the new month, in this case the month of Ramadan. But let's say we ourselves haven't gone out. We don't have all the criteria, we don't know all the knowledge, we don't have all those rulings of how to look for the moon. Then the second opinion is that if a group of people whom we trust, if they say that they've seen the moon, or we get some reliable resource, an email comes from a reputable organization, right? Maybe, for example, one of the international or national bodies in Canada or North America, they say that, we have witnesses who have seen the moon in such and such country, we've investigated it, we believe their statement to be true, then you can also rely on that. So an email comes, people tell you that they have seen the moon, and you're satisfied with their statement, then you can accept that. The third option, or the third way to determine the new moon, is if 2 just men, bear witness that they've seen the moon. And as long as there's no countervailing argument that would put their statement to question, then we're okay. So let's say 10 people go out, and out of the 10, only 2 of them see the moon, and the other 8, or maybe all of them see, but they all have different opinions of where it was, what direction the moon, the 2 points were pointing to, the angle, all of those things. If there's a difference amongst those people, then obviously we have to call that sighting into question. But if 2 just men, and just being adil meaning that they don't perform major sins, they don't commit minor sins, they would be considered as being just and reputable from the religious perspective. When they say that they have seen the moon, and there's no other evidence to go against it, then we can accept that testimony from them. And the fourth criteria for how to determine the new moon is that 30 days pass from the month of Sha'aban, so that automatically makes the next day the first of Ramadan, because we don't have 31 days within the lunar calendar. Right? So automatically, so even in our case, if the moon is not seen Sunday night, and again, there's a very small possibility for it to be seen in our region, in North America, if that doesn't happen, then obviously Monday would be the 30th of Sha'aban, meaning that automatically Tuesday has to be the month of Ramadan. So basically, we have to have one of these four criteria. Now, I will just mention as a side note that this is based on Ayatollah Sistani's research and his rulings. There are some scholars today who, for example, will say that astronomical calculations by the scientists, that is perfectly allowable. They don't actually deem the actual sighting of the moon to begin the new month. And so obviously if you follow one of those maraja that they have that opinion, and you take that as being what you need to follow, then obviously you'd follow that, and you wouldn't necessarily need to follow one of these four criteria that Sayyid Sistani has given. But he's not the minority. His view is obviously the majority of the scholars share this opinion. There is a minority obviously that deem non-sighting of the moon, and there's also various other issues even within this. I don't want to get into all of that today, but for example, some scholars allow the sighting of the moon by way of telescope, right? And to accept that as a sighting. Others say, no, it has to be by the naked eye. Others say, no, you can use the telescope to find the moon in the sky and then use your naked eye to actually see it. But so there's a lot of specific minor issues that go into the actual sighting aspect. But again, I don't want to go into that because obviously it is a larger discussion, and it would really detract us from many of our discussion today. But obviously it's just important to ensure that you're following what your scholar says particularly. And and also just to appreciate the fact that within North America, we do have at least one or two major bodies of Shia ulama who have representatives across the Americas, at least within Canada and the USA. Some representation in South America as well for moon sighting. And these are reputable, respectable scholars that we trust. And obviously we take their word for it if they have seen the moon, or people that they trust come and say that they have actually also seen the moon to begin the new month. Going on to the next part of our discussion is, and I might have touched, yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. I won't go into it today just because it's a longer discussion, and I'm not fully comfortable with all the rulings of Sayyid Sistani on the particular topic, so inshallah I'll probably skip that today. Yeah. One of the questions that people ask, and I mean it shouldn't be a confusion within our community, within our society, especially for followers of Ahlul Bayt, is the question of the start and end time of fasting. So I think I spoke about it last week on the Jummah prayer, but I want to further elaborate on it today. Is that when we look at the scholars and their fatwa on the time to begin fasting and end fasting, we realize that it's not at the time of Fajr to start, and nor is it at the time of Maghrib to break the fast. And actually what Sayyid Sistani mentions in his new version of his Islamic rules is that it is an obligation, it is wajib to actually begin before the time of Fajr Adhan, and to end the fast a little bit after the time of the Maghrib Adhan. And so when in his Risala, when he's asked to define the start time of Fajr, or rather the start time of when the fast begins, and obviously a little bit before that we start, he refers to ruling 728 from his Risala, which talks about the time of Fajr prayer. And the portion which was important here, he says that near the time of the morning call to prayer, the adhan, a whiteness in the sky moves upward from the east, which is called the first dawn, also referred to as sometimes the false dawn in the books of fiqh. And he says when that whiteness spreads in the sky, he goes, that is the second dawn, and that's the start of the prescribed time for the morning prayer. And obviously, it will also depend on the geographic region, right? So, I mean, Edmonton and all these northern, regions north of Edmonton, obviously, we don't really have a clear distinction between night and day, right? Even here, if you go outside at 11 o'clock at night, 10:30, 11, it's still some brightness in the sky, very slight. And obviously, as you travel further north in Alberta and in Canada, you will notice, obviously, that there is more and more daylight in the summer months. Even in the midnight, it'll still be obviously light outside. But the point here being is that basically when it comes to the Fajr, there is what they call this false dawn and the true dawn. And the Fajr begins at the second dawn, and probably there are other books that give a further explanation, but again, I don't want to go into too much of the specifics of the ahkam of it. But suffice it to mention that, as the scholars say, that we need to start fasting a bit before the time of Fajr. So as an example, we'll have on our prayer calendars an imsak time, right? Imsak meaning that from that point we need to stop doing all of those things that would invalidate our fast. And here it's about 15 minutes, I think, in Edmonton. If you go to the East Coast, or let's say to Toronto, it's a smaller amount of time. It might be 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes, because obviously they're situated in a different geographical location compared to Edmonton is, or any other northern cities. But obviously this is a precautionary time. That 15-minute buffer is just to ensure that we are maintaining that buffer that we don't cross into it and eat anything or do anything that would invalidate the fast. Here is kept again at 15 minutes. Ideally, we should try to keep that amount of time, that just to ensure that we haven't, gone into the time of the second dawn. And even, we have the same issue when it comes to prayers. Many times the calendar will say a certain time for prayer, or maybe your smartphone, the adhan will ring on it, and people will start to pray right away. Even in that case, the scholars say, the Marajas say that for precautionary sake, you should wait a few minutes even after that, right? So if adhan is 1:32, for example, on the calendar, and even if you think that your phone or your watch is completely synchronized to whatever the time clock is, still we should wait a few minutes until we're certain that the time for that prayer has set in. So if it's 3 minutes you want to wait, if it's 5 minutes you want to wait, there's no problem in that. It's better to wait a bit than to start your prayers earlier and have that basically not accepted prayer. So that's for the start time. At the other side is the time to break the fast. And as we mentioned, that we don't break it at sunset as the other Muslims do, but rather that we wait until the time of Maghrib prayer. And as Sayyid Sistani mentions, is to delay that even a bit. So again, if Maghrib is, let's say, 10:15, maybe we wait 3, 4, or 5 minutes. And even better than that, as the scholars say, is that it's mustahab to pray Maghrib at least, and then break the fast. Now obviously we take into account that maybe you have young children at home who are just learning how to fast. It's their first year, maybe they won't be able to even wait that 4 or 5 minutes. Obviously if they can't do that, we're not going to force them to wait that 5 or 7 minutes, but give them a buffer of 2 or 3 minutes. If people have health issues maybe and they don't feel that 5 minutes is possible, or enough time to pray Maghrib is maybe not doable for them, then obviously they can break right away within that buffer time. But ideally it's mustahab that we wait, we pray Maghrib, and then we break our fast at that point in time. Yes? What? To wait after? So Sayyid Sistani in the new version of Risala, he says you have to wait. It's a fatwa he's given now, yeah. So he actually says that not to break right at Maghrib, but wait. He says you have to actually you must wait a few minutes after Maghrib. So it's a fatwa he's given on that. Yeah, so it's not a recommendation; it's an obligation in that case. And when he addresses this in the Risala, in terms of when to break the fast, he again points the believers to the time for Maghrib, and he says that one must not perform the Maghrib prayer, and obviously that means also break the fast, before the redness of the sky in the east, which appears after the sunset, has passed overhead. So if you look at our center, if you come out of the center and you look to the right, that's west. And if you go outside, even right at like maybe 5 minutes before Maghrib, and you see the sunset, if you look towards your left on the east side, you'll see that there will be a redness still in the sky. So until that redness overhead in the east has not completely dissipated and gone away, the time for Maghrib has not yet set in. Now obviously again, challenges come because of clouds and weather and all of these different factors. And so he also mentions in his Risala that if you were faced with a doubt, clouds, you're in a mountainous area, there's smoke in the atmosphere and you can't see the sunset, then again you should precautionary wait a few minutes until you're certain that the time for Maghrib has set in, and then you can either begin the prayers or break the fast. And then he ends off and he says, even if one does not have such a doubt, he must, based on obligatory precaution, wait until the aforementioned time. So again, we have to wait a bit and to ensure that Maghrib has actually set in. And traditionally as a community, at least in many communities I've been to, is we'll have Maghrib and Isha in Jamaat. Sometimes between Maghrib and Isha, people hand out dates, or there'll be something that will go around so people can at least break the fast at that point with that date. And then after Isha, they will actually have the full iftar, the full dinner, the full meal at that point in time. It's not an obligation to do it that way, but it seems to have worked out for many communities, and it hopefully keeps us in track that we're actually maintaining the actual full period of the time. Now obviously if we have friends who are non-Shia, maybe at work or at school, we have this challenge, right? Like they're going for iftar at Maghrib or at sunset time, right? Which may be, 20 minutes before our time. And they might invite you for iftar. So obviously we need to ensure that we are communicating to them what our obligation is, right? That we're breaking our fast at Maghrib time, not at sunset. Not to get into a debate or a polemical argument with them, but to let them know that obviously we have different rulings. And if it's done again in a proper way, there should be no issues of problems within the believers that are following different methodologies. Even when we were working previously and we had many non-Shias who we worked with, we explained to them the same thing, that we break our fast at Maghrib, so they would go and have iftar. At sunset, I'd go and pray, go back, and obviously we would continue to eat together. So as long as it's done in a proper way and understanding with them, there's obviously, they should be accepting of that method that we follow. But unless there's complete, fear of your life, I think, and you're going to be killed if you're not going to fast, really there's no other reason why we should be breaking earlier, just because other Muslims are breaking at an earlier time in the evening. One of the things I mentioned last week, I want to actually give the ruling for, is this issue of to break or not to break, in terms of the intention. Right? I mentioned last week about the niyat, and we had spoken about the intention a few months ago, is that our intention really drives all of our actions in Islam. So an intention to do fasting, when we intend to fast, we obviously make that intention either verbal or within our mind, and we let ourselves know that we're getting into the state of fasting. I have to make a verbal intention. I don't have to say I am fasting to Tuesday, for example, qurbatan lillahi ta'ala. I don't have to make a verbal intention word for word, although it is recommended to do so. But Sayyid Sistani and probably many other maraja in this same regard do make a very clear distinction here, where they say that if a person is undecided in his intention, whether to break or not to break an obligatory fast, like that of Ramadan, or he decides to do so, he said the fast immediately becomes invalid, even if the person does not actually break it, or you're repentant. So you're sitting at home, you know that you're fasting, you get really upset, you're frustrated, something happens, and you say, you know what, I'm going to go and break my fast, I'm going into the kitchen right now. Even if you don't go into the kitchen and grab a bite to eat, making that intention that you want to break your fast, he says it immediately nullifies your fast. Now that doesn't mean that you can eat now, you still can't eat, but your fast basically. So even if we don't eat, but because that intention is so important and within the Islam, the intention itself to break the fast automatically nullifies the fast right then and there. So obviously you still have to make up the qadha of that fast at the end of the month of Ramadan. You need to redo it. but you can't just go and eat now because you have broken the fast. So it's really important, again, to keep in mind that the intention in Islam plays a very prominent role. This doesn't apply in a lot of other cases. Like if I right now intended to go into a brother's pocket and steal his wallet, I don't get the sin because I thought about that or made that intention. I would get the sin when I do the action, right? I don't get the sin if I am thinking to say something bad to somebody. I get the sin when I actually do the action, right? But here in the case of fasting, we see that Allah changes the rule, where even the intention to do something to invalidate the fast will actually nullify that fast. So again, it's very important to be careful even about our intention in the month of Ramadan. Yes? Correct, yeah, there's no kafara, no fidya, that's right. It's just the qada, you have to make up that one fast that you did that action for. So again, a point to keep in mind with the month of Ramadan, that we don't even joke about it or, think, oh, I'm going to go and break my fast because I'm hungry or this or that, or I'm thirsty and I can't bear the fast, because that will actually have an impact on the fast of the month of Ramadan. Last week we also talked about, and I want to further elaborate on that today, about the 8 things which invalidate the fast. And we mentioned that in the newest version of Ayatollah Sistani's Risala, he's removed one of the 9, which was to immerse your head underwater. So previously it was not allowed to submerge your entire head underwater. You could still go swimming, but you couldn't put your entire head underwater. He's now changed that ruling. It's now permissible, although he says it's highly reprehensible, it's makruh to do so, but it doesn't invalidate the fast. But one of the things also that we have to keep in mind is the difference between intentional and unintentional, right? So, as an example, I'm fasting in the month of Ramadan, and I go to work, or I'm in the house, and I accidentally go to the kitchen and grab a glass of water and I drink it. I drink it, it goes down, and I realize, oh, I'm fasting. If I did it accidentally, it doesn't break my fast. Right? It won't make me have a kafara, a fidya, a penalty, nothing, as long as it was unintentional. I didn't mean to do it. Right? So unintentionally, basically, it doesn't invalidate the fast. Your fast remains valid. There's no penalty to make. There's no anything else to make up. But obviously, once you realize you did that action, if you had food in your mouth, you'd have to spit it out. If you had water in your mouth, you'd have to spit it out. Unintentionally, if it's intentional, obviously there's a separate ruling for that would invalidate the fast. And even there are secondary rulings. I don't want to go into a lot of them because it gets quite technical. But generally speaking, anything done unintentionally within Islam, if you knew the rulings, you weren't like completely ignorant and didn't care to learn about them, they would not invalidate the fast of the month of Ramadan. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Sayyid Sistani does mention in his Risala that an individual should try to ensure that he keeps away from anything that may invalidate his fast. Right? So for example, he doesn't speak about this example about swimming directly, but he talks about if a person goes somewhere and he thinks or he might be forced to eat some food. Right? He goes to a friend's house, maybe a work party, maybe a get-together at work, and he knows he's going to be so much pressured into eating food that he's going to have to, or he's going to almost be forced to do it, then you need to keep away from that. So although for swimming he doesn't talk about it directly, but I think if a person is, obviously they know their limits, right? They know that if I do this action, if I dive into the deep end, I'm going to swallow some water, then obviously we need to be, be careful about that on a personal level. And again, a lot of this, that would be at a personal level, right? That I might do that. I might, dive into the pool and I might end up, swallowing some water. So if there is that possibility, it would be better to refrain from that. It wouldn't be forbidden. I mean, you wouldn't be prohibited from doing that action, but you just still have to be a bit more careful in those regards. So the difference between unintentional and intentional hopefully is clear. Anything done intentionally and voluntarily, it doesn't invalidate the fast. and your fast does not become invalid if you do it. You still need to continue on with that fast. There's no fidya, there's no kafara, there's no penalty to pay. Again, I'm just going over a lot of the basic rules. There are a lot of more specific issues in terms of the penalties, the kafaras, where even unintentionally it may invalidate the fast. But again, you can refer to Ayatollah Sistani or whoever marja you follow, refer to their book. Because there are a lot of other very fine technicalities, a lot of these rules, which just time wouldn't allow us to go into each and every single one of them one by one. One of the things I want to also look at are some of the things that are makruh to do while we're fasting. So makruh meaning that it's better not to do these things, it's better to avoid them. If we do them, it's not a problem, but obviously when we go back to the spirit of fasting, it's all about taqwa. It's all about getting closer to Allah. And so anything which is makruh in terms of the ahkam of these things, it means that we're going to, we're not really fulfilling our true goal of attaining taqwa by doing these things which Allah has asked us to stay away from within the month of Ramadan. And there are 9 things which our scholars mention. Number 1 is putting any medication in the eyes and applying collyrium, which I had to look up because I had no idea what it was. But it was a liquid wash, which they say is used as an eye cleanser. And doing this in any way that the taste or smell of it would reach your throat. So even sometimes people who use eye drops, let's say you have contact lenses and you need to have, you have to keep putting drops in your eyes if it's very dry outside. Or any kind of medication within the eyes. Sometimes that taste might get into the throat because they're connected. So if you feel that is going to happen, that the taste or smell of that medicine or liquid will get into the throat, it's better not to do it. It's not haram, it's not forbidden, but it's just something better not to do in the state of fasting. Again, if it's medication, obviously you need to do it for medicinal purposes. It's acceptable, but you need to ensure that taste or smell would not reach the throat. Number 2 is doing anything which would cause weakness. And Sayyid gives 2 examples. One is giving blood, or number 2 is taking a shower. Sometimes people take a shower and it relaxes them, and they just, they just become lethargic and lazy, right? Very tired and weak. He says that's also makruh to do that. Again, no, that's makruh. It's not forbidden. People may have medical reasons. Maybe you've come home from a hard day at work. You're not pleasant. You want to go for a shower and freshen up before you come to the mosque, whatever. Again, just something to keep in mind that these are, if it's going to cause you weakness, then he says this is something to keep away from. Number 3, putting medication in the nose, so any kind of nose drops, maybe in a ventilator or something to clear up the nose, to the nose passage. If one does not know that it will reach the throat, that medicine, and if it does, if one knows that it will reach the throat, it is not permitted. Right? So obviously the ear, nose, and throat, these seem to all be connected inside how Allah has created us. And so many times you'll use some nasal spray or mist, and you might even taste it in the back of your throat. It might even go down the throat. If it doesn't go down the throat, that's not a problem. But if you know that it will, then obviously you need to keep away from that or do whatever it is that you can do to ensure that it doesn't actually go down the throat. Number 4, which is disapproved for a fasting person, is to smell aromatic plants or sweet smelling plants, roses, flowers, these sorts of things. Again, it's not prohibited, right? It's not like in the Hajj where it's haram to smell a pleasant smell. It's makruh again in the time of fasting is to smell plants that have that good aroma which they give off. Number 5 is for women to sit in water. So a tub bath or maybe in a swimming pool, for example. Again, something which is disapproved for somebody in the state of fasting. Number 6 is to use a suppository, and you can look that up if you don't know what it is. Number 7 is making the clothes which are on your body wet. So, going to a water park, and running through the water fountains or the sprinklers. Again, something which is makruh, to make the clothes on the body, which are on the body that you're wearing, to become wet, is something which is makruh. Number 8 is having a tooth extracted or anything that would cause blood to come from the mouth. So if you need to go to the dentist for a filling or for a cleanup or for your regular maybe dental check, either try to schedule it around the month of Ramadan. If you really have to go, if there's obviously an emergency, you have to have a tooth removed or a root canal or something has to be done. Obviously there's no you can't get around it in that case, but in normal circumstances where we can avoid it, then we should try to not to do anything which would cause blood to come out of the mouth. And obviously even brushing the teeth, right? That might be also a question. So it's not haram to brush your teeth in the month of Ramadan. You can still use toothpaste. You can use either the miswak, the traditional stick that people would use, or a conventional toothbrush with toothpaste. That's all okay. We need to make sure you don't swallow, obviously, the toothpaste or the water when you're gargling. And also, the scholars say you need to make sure that when you're done, that you try to remove as much of the saliva in the mouth that would have been mixed with the toothpaste, right? So that you're not sort of later on, maybe, 5-10 minutes later, you have saliva building up in your mouth, and then you swallow some toothpaste that might have been lingering in your mouth. So if you need to brush, before you go to work or before you go to school, not a problem. But just make sure that you remove all of that excess moisture that was created when you brush your teeth, through gargling and rinsing your mouth out. But again, it's makruh if to do anything that would cause blood to come out of the mouth, though. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm sure we could probably find medical ways to, I don't know them, but I'm sure there are other medical ways that would be around, that would be available to stop a nosebleed. Maybe putting the head up might not, I don't know if the blood is going to reach into the throat like that, but it might. If it does, we'd have to look into it, but if it doesn't, you'd be okay. And there may be other methods by which you could use to stop the nosebleed from happening, which might, wouldn't entail any blood going down the throat or something. Mm. Okay. Mm. So so another issue would be is that there would be a difference between going down the throat and actually ingesting it, swallowing it. So if you're able to spit it out, like even, in the month of Ramadan, if you have anything in your mouth, like you have some food stuck between your teeth, it's one thing for it to be in the mouth, it's another thing for it to go down into the stomach, right? So obviously in that case, even with blood, you'd want to be able to try to spit it out as much as possible as well. Yeah. Sorry? I don't think it would, no, not the blood, no. Yes? Sorry? Inhaler, sorry. Inhalers are permissible, there's no problem with that. Inhalers are okay, yeah. And the last three things that are makruh for somebody who's fasting is, again, brushing the teeth with a wet piece of wood, like the miswak, the stick that people traditionally use in Middle Eastern countries, or even the conventional toothbrush we use today with fibers and bristles. Putting water or any other fluid in the mouth without a due cause. So you're thirsty at home and you you can't drink, but you just put water in the mouth and gargle and spit it out, just to keep your mouth, moist. Again, it's not haram, it's makruh to do that. If you needed to do that, it's permissible, but it's something which has been disapproved by Allah, disapproved. And number 11 is immersing the entire head in water. So again, it's not haram to do so, but it is something which is disapproved. It's makruh, is discouraged to do one of these 11 things. Again, keeping in mind that if brushing, if there's a strong chance you're going to end up drinking or swallowing some of that water, then you obviously would want to be extra careful when you're brushing. Putting water in the mouth, for example, let's say you really need to do it, your lips are completely, dry or whatever, you have a valid reason, you could do it, but again, keeping in mind that you don't want to swallow any of that moisture, try to spit out as much as you can. And as he mentions at point number 11 is immersing the entire head underwater, which again won't invalidate, but it is something which is makruh to perform. We had gone over this chart last week, so I don't really want to speak about it more, maybe just go over very briefly if there's any questions. This is basically, and we'll make this available as well, a sort of a brief overview of the qadha, the fidya, and the kafara, and where the differences lie. Right? So, if you're elderly, for example, there's no qadha fast, so you're old and you can't fast. There's no qadha because you can't fast to make it up, but you do have to offer the fidya, which is 750 grams of food per fast, and there's no kafara. And so again, it goes over the details. I don't want to really go into it one by one. We'll make it available online. So there's 5 reasons for not fasting, and then there's 5 also for travelers. So travelers obviously are unique circumstance because people who are traveling just on vacation, they have a different rule than people who travel for business, right? So if I live in Edmonton, but my job is in Red Deer or Calgary, and I travel on a day-to-day basis or a couple days a week, then obviously there are a different rule in that case for people that they have to fast because their job entails traveling, compared to somebody who's just going out of town for a couple of days for family or even for a business trip, right? For vacation. There's different rulings for each of them. Whether you leave before Dhuhr or after Dhuhr, there's a different rule. Whether you're going to be 10 days in your destination or less than 10 days. When you're going to be coming back to your home, is it before Dhuhr or after Dhuhr? Are you traveling for something haram or halal? So if you're going to Calgary to go to a haram concert, there's a different rule if you want to fast and pray than if you're going for business, right? So there's multiple questions. Why are you traveling? What for? All of these different things, and each different outcome will give you a different ruling, right? So the situations are unique to each individual. But yeah, if there are any questions, we can tackle them for a few minutes. Okay. You leave Sunday, come back Friday? And that's a consecutive, that's like a regular thing for you to do? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, sure, yeah. So the question from the brother is that he travels for work. So from here to Fort McMurray, leaving on a Sunday, coming back on a Friday, and it's consecutive. So every week he does that particular route. So basically for a person, so there's 2 things. One is a person who travels for business or for their job. So if traveling is a part of your job description, or you work out of town and you have to travel every day for work, or you travel and you're there for 5 days and you come back, those people are referred to as somebody who's a frequent traveler in Islam. So for them, they pray full and they still have to fast, right? So that's one example. Somebody who travels for work like that, like they work out of town and they live, let's say, in another city. Another example would be somebody who doesn't necessarily travel every week, but traveling is a part of their job description. So you get a job at a company and they tell you, 1 week every month or 2 weeks every month, we expect you'll have to go to the head office in Chicago, let's say, right? So you're not traveling every week, but traveling is a part of your job description. So even those kinds of individuals, they would also be considered as a frequent traveler, so they would also be praying full. Even this would extend, and there are a lot of specifics, so I might not get into all of them today, but even people who are traveling for education, right? Let's say you're living in one city, but you travel to another city for university, right? And you're constantly back and forth, or college, or whatever, what have you. And you're on the road, you're there, you travel, you're there for school 5 days a week, you come back home on the weekend. Again, those would be unique rulings where you'd again have to be following a set ruling. But definitely for those who are frequently traveling, and that a part of their job, or they work in another city, they would be praying full namaz and also offering the fast even though they're traveling. Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the staying at destination for less than 10 days and staying for more would not be applicable to a frequent traveler. So frequent traveler is their own category. So the question for the sisters is that in terms of the frequent traveler, we're not going to combine that with the staying at your destination less than 10 days or more than 10 days. So frequent traveler is their own category. So even if let's say I frequently travel to Calgary for business, even if I'm there just for a couple of hours or a day or two and I come back, I'm still considered a frequent traveler. The 10-day rule is more, let's say I'm going on vacation, right? I'm traveling in the month of Ramadan, and I'm going to the Rocky Mountains, let's say to Banff or Jasper. And I'm going to be there for only 7 days in the mountains, right? Because I'm there less than 10 days on vacation, I wouldn't be able to fast, and I would pray my namaz in full, my salat in full. But if I say, no, I'm going to the mountains, I'm going to be there for 14 days, I make the niyat, we're driving out, we rented a hotel or a chalet, 14 days. Because I'm going to stay in one locality for more than 10 days, now I'm considered to be a temporary resident of that city for more than 10. And so then I would have to, from day one, I would be praying full. And if I was month of Ramadan, you'd have to continue to fast at that time as well. So the 10 days is more so for infrequent travelers, we can say. People who are on vacation and things like this, or for business, just a one-off trip. Yes? Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, so the question is that if a person made the intention to stay somewhere for 10 days and after, let's say, 6 days they have to leave, what happens to those fasting and prayers that they did? Those would be valid. They would be okay. You wouldn't have to repeat them. So those 6 days that you stayed there, those fasts would be perfectly valid. And then obviously from that day that you've now traveled, wherever you're going, you'd now have to determine your responsibility based on where you're going. If you're going back home, right, you have another responsibility. If you're going to another place and you're going to stay there for maybe another 10 days, then you'd have another responsibility as well to fulfill in that case. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Right now, I don't know when I'm going back.
Okay.
We are here like 4 weeks now.
Okay.
But I don't know that date because they announced that June 2nd, 2 people are going back.
Okay.
But somebody told me, no, don't come back.
Mm-hmm.
We will give you a date.
Okay.
Because we don't have a certain date. It might be second week of June,
Mm-hmm.
end of the June. So what we do.
Yeah. So for the benefit of the ladies, the question was for the people, for example, from Fort McMurray who are here and have been here already a month and there's still no clarity of when they will be going back home, and obviously based on their own circumstances there. Definitely the different Maraj, I think, have different opinions on this. I know with Ayatollah Sistani, he has a ruling where up to 30 or 31 days you can consider yourself to be a traveler. So within this last 30 days, you could have and you might have been praying qasr and not fasting if you had to. I'd have to see what he has after that period though, because I know for 30 or 31 days he allows a person to be wavering in their intention. Previously, he allowed up to 2 months for a sort of not having a decision of whether you're going to be in a particular place or not. But maybe offline we can take a look into it and see what I can take a look into see what the ruling is, if it's anything more than 1 month for you. Yes. Mm-hmm. To fast. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. To fast, okay. So yeah, we'll take a look at that as brother mentioned that that you would be praying the full, you'd be doing completion, but we'll confirm that inshallah after the program. And you had one question.
Yes, so it's so social when you doing something else, and we being two Christians with that big fast
To
push yourself. Let's say like your manager tells you that make sure you sell
mm-hmm.
sell the full package, right? And you're trying your best, but you're fasting.
Yeah. So your question is that if you're working like in a retail and your manager asks you to push the sales of something, so as long as you're not lying about what you're selling, and we'll probably speak about that on Thursday evening here, some of the akhlaqi aspects of the fasting of what to do and what not to do. it wouldn't, lying even wouldn't break your fast in terms of the ahkam, the fiqh, that you'd have to give the kafara or a fidya or a penalty. But it would, in fact, it would probably impact the spiritual aspect of the fast. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. So the question is, if you're going from point A to point B, from, let's say, Edmonton to Fort McMurray, and on the way there, how do you pray? So even if you have the intention you're going to be in that destination more than 10 days, because you're journeying, you'd be praying qasr at that time. You'd be praying the qasr salat. So yeah, you wouldn't be praying full on that particular journey until you actually reach home. So just one of the quick things, and we'll continue on with this, is that if you are, let's say you leave Edmonton at noon, and Dhuhr is at 1:30, and it'll take you till 5 o'clock, let's just say, to get to Fort McMurray. If you were to pray on the road, right, so 1:30 comes, let's say you stop, I don't know, we're outside of Edmonton, you pray, and you wanted to pray your salat right then and there outdoors, you would pray in qasr, right, because you're on the road traveling. But if you didn't pray and you waited and you said, I'll get home to Fort Mac and I'll pray my prayers there, now because you've reached home, you have to pray your salat in full, right? So also just as a side note is that you need to, the prayers, whether you pray them or you have to offer the qadha, are dependent on the state where you're at and the time of that travel. So if you're at home, you pray it full. If you're on the road, you pray qasr. And if you made your salat qadha while traveling, when you make it up, even if you're at home, you make it up as the qadha at home, not as the full prayers. Going to the next slide, we'll probably end because we have the du'as coming up pretty soon. And again, I'll post this online because there's a lot of information on it. But this is basically a summary that we put together about the qadha, the fidya, and the kafara, and the rulings. So we have the 8 different things that break the fast. And I've tried to break it up into, so all of them have a qadha, no matter what. You always have to make up at least one fast for one that you missed. There's a 1-to-1 ratio for the qadha. But there's also a kafara for many of them. Not all of them though, but for example, eating and drinking, there's a kafara. For example, if you do something haram or with a halal. One point I do want to mention as a clarification, and Sayyid Sistani has changed the rulings here. Last week we mentioned that if you did something haram, you had to offer all 3 of the kafaras, freeing the slave, fasting 60 days, and feeding 60 people. But he's actually also changed that ruling in his new version of the Risala, where he says you only do one of the 3, so you don't have to do all 3. So that ruling has also changed, and so I made a clarification on this. Although he does say in certain cases, like the 3 up there, the first 3, and the third from the bottom, that is still mustahab to do all 3. In the case of those 4, if you can do all 3, it's still mustahab to do all 3 in those instances. Otherwise, it's or them. It's not a combination between all 3 of them. Again, we'll post this so it's available for everybody. Just to run through this really quickly. The kafara, as we mentioned, are 3 different kafaras we have within Islam. One is to free a slave, which apparently in today's day and age is not applicable. We don't have slavery as we had, even up to the 1960s in America. The second aspect of a kafara is to fast 2 months, and it's 1 month and 1 day straight, and then the rest of the days can be staggered. It doesn't have to be consecutive 60 days. And feeding 60 people, which is 750 grams of food, wheat, barley, bread, etc. And I checked with an alim today about the ruling of Sayyid Sistani, and he says it's based on obligatory precaution. Those 60 people have to be Shia. So they can't be Ahlul Sunnah, they can't be non-Muslims, they have to be Shia, based on ihtiyat, right? And so even I told him, I said, well, for us to find 60 Shias locally who meet the criteria is very difficult. And so he even advised me what he does is through connections, he sends it overseas to, the Far East, to Middle East, to many, East Africa, to maybe India, Pakistan, these kinds of countries where there'll be a greater possibility of finding them, but obviously we have to have a network of individuals who we trust in those countries that can ensure that the needy get that food as well. Unless we know 60 people here within our communities in Canada, and again, the same Shaykh told me that when he spoke to a Shia institution in Canada, in America, that they knew that there were people who were deserving within North America. So we can contact them, and that can also be given to them, and they would be able to distribute that as well. But that is basically the general kafara within the religion, one of these three things. So some basic rulings about the kafara. One is that we can't be negligent or lazy or waste time in giving the kafara, but we don't have to do it immediately. So the month of Ramadan finishes, we don't have to do it the very first day of the month of Shawwal. You can delay it if you need to, but it's obviously better not to delay it too far because you might forget about it. God forbid you pass away, and you have to now put that in your wasiyah, into your will. So it's better to do it as soon as possible, but not obligatory to do it right away. If you're looking around to get the goods to the right people, then obviously that's a good reason why we have to delay this payment of the kafara. And he also mentions that a kafara becomes obligatory on someone and you don't give it for a few years, there's no added penalty. Right? So if I didn't do my kafara for 4 years, I don't have to assume in the 5th year there's a penalty to pay because I haven't done it. It's not like double or triple or anything like that. That isn't anything that we have to worry about. In another ruling on the kafara, Sayyid mentions that, and this is a bit of a bigger ruling, so I've broken it up into 3 paragraphs. He says if someone who must feed 60 poor people, according to the obligatory precaution, they must be Shia, as the kafara for 1 day has access to all 60 people, then you cannot reduce the number of people to feed, even if you give the same amount of kafara. So for example, you can't give 2 mud, and mud is a weight of about 750 grams. You can't give 2 portions of food to 30 people. If you have access to 60 people, you have to feed 60 people. You can't say, oh, here's 10 people, so I'll give them 6 quantities of the food and I'll be okay. Right? As a last resort, there is an option, but first and foremost, if you can feed 60 people, then you have to go out and do that, right? And then work from there on. He then says that if you cannot find 60 poor people, but for example, you find 30 and you can give them 2 quantities of food to each of them, then you can do that. However, based on the obligatory precaution, whenever you can, you must give that 1 quantity mud of food to another 30 people. So again, you can combine it if you can't find enough people, but the priority is to actually ensure that 60 people are fed, not 30 people given 2 meals in a day, as an example. And last but not least, and we'll end with this because I know we're creeping into the time of the du'as. He says that if a person has multiple years of qadha to perform, it's best to offer the most recent year of the qadha first, so as to avoid the penalty. Right? So let's say this is 2016. If you have fasting from 2012, 13, 14, and 15 you haven't done, and you want this next 5 days, you want to make up the qadha of, let's say, 5 days, don't make the intention these 5 days are from 2013, because that's already done. Rather, make the intention that these are from 2015, from last year, and work your way to the most recent. Because if you don't make up those qadha before the next Ramadan, then you have to give the fidya, the recompense for that. Right? So always start with the most recent of fasts that you've missed and then work your way backwards. And then when the Ramadan finishes, then okay, I have 10 from 2013 to make up, then make up those, and then 2014, and then work your way that way. But it's always important to start with the most recent ones you missed and then work your way backwards from that point, right? Just so you avoid the penalty for the ones that are coming due right now. Inshallah, we'll end. I know that, again, there's probably a lot of questions. Again, on Thursday evening, we will have, in the regular Thursday night majlis, we're going to look more at the philosophy of fasting, and the hadith also will look at of things that are not in the ahkam, but invalidate the fast from a spiritual perspective. We'll look at that on Thursday nights. And perhaps before the month of Ramadan begins, that we might have another opportunity. If not, sometime during the month, we'll, inshallah, tackle some of the topics that we have. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.